We begin today the Gemara on Daf Lamed Aleph, 3 lines down from the top of the Amud. The Gemara continues the halachas regarding the case where you have the Kain doing the Aveda with a machshava shaloi bizmanai, which is pigul. He's going to eat it out of its time, and there's a machshava shaloi b'mkaimai, that he's going to eat it out of its place. Okay, so in the Mishnah, it mentioned that if you have a machshava where you're thinking a half a kazayas, I'm going to eat out of its time. A half a kazayas, I'm going to eat out of its place. They combine, even though it's different kinds of machshavas, it combines to become pasul, not pickle. Not to be pasul on the higher level of pickle, which would mean that the basar then, yichayev kares if you eat from it, but it'll be pasul. That was the case mentioned in the Mishnah. Okay, so regarding this, the Gemara brings here a machlekes. Itmar, we learned the following machlekes: chatzi zayis chutz lizmanai. The kohen is thinking that half a kazayis is going to be eaten out of its time, so that's pigul. Chatzi zayis chutz l'mekaimai. Another half is thinking that it's going to be eaten just out of its place, which is only a psul. So that would combine, and that would become one kazayis to pasul. But now he went on and thought another thought: the chatzi zayis chutz lizmanai, that he's going to eat a half a kazayis out of its time. So now you do have a full kazayas that he thought that he's going to eat out of its time. But it wasn't in that kind of order. First he's thinking a half a kazayas out of its time, then he interrupts it with a thought of out of its place, and then again another half a kazayas out of its time. So Amar Rava says, Vayikatz kiyosha na pigul. And that pigul that was dormant there woke up, and now it could become pigul. This is taking from the lashon of the pasuk, Vayikatz kiyosha havaya. Right? Okay, so he's using that expression of the pasuk, and he's saying Vayikatz kiyosha na pigul. Okay, so what's Rav in essence saying here? That even though in the beginning, when you had the machshav of chutz lizmanai, it was only a half a kazayas, so that's not enough of an amount to passel, and therefore when he thought the machshav of chutz l'mekaimai, it combined to that. It became one shear of a kazayas combined with the chutz l'mekaimai to passel. So if it combined to that, so there's no pigul. It's combined with chutz l'mekaimai, which is not the level of pigul. But nevertheless, now that later he did think again another machshav of a half a kazayis of chutz l'zmanai, so now that original chutz l'zmanai in the beginning does combine with the chutz l'zmanai afterwards, and it does become a pigul. And we're not going to say, oh, it was already combined to the chutz l'mekaimai before, and therefore it remains in that category, which is only a psul like chutz l'mekaimai. No, now that he thinks again another half a kazayis chutz l'zmanai, it wakes up that original half a kazayis of chutz l'zmanai to combine to become a full-fledged pigul. Rav Amnuna says that doesn't work. Iruv machshavis have. There is a mixture of two different machshavis, the machshav of chutz l'zmanai and the machshav of chutz l'mekaimai. So because of the mixture of these two machshavis, it will not combine. So what he's saying is that once it was already combined to the machshava of chutz l'mekaimai in the beginning, even if you're going to say that now it would combine with this second half of the chutz l'zmanai, but it still remains combined to before. So even if now you have a full kazayas of chutz l'zmanai, but it's still mixed in with the chutz l'mekaimai from before, and therefore it cannot anymore be pigul, as the halacha by pigul is that we learned before. Pigul has to be exclusively pigul. If it's mixed with another machshava, it won't be pigul. Amar Rava, so now Rava says, Minna amin Allah. What is my source for the halacha that I'm saying here? The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Kebeye oichel rishain. Yeah, kebeitza, kebeya, oichel rishain. If you have the full amount of food, which is a rishain l'toma, which is a kebeya, and the kebeya oichel sheni, and then there's another kebeya of toma, which is from food, but it's only a sheni l'toma. Okay, two different levels of toma, rishain and sheni. Shabalul on zebazeh, they were mixed with one another. So now what happens? Rishain. They have the halacha of a rishain l'toma, because in this mixture, you know for sure that you have the full shear of a rishain l'toma that's there. So even though it's mixed together with a sheni l'toma, but since the rishain l'toma is in it, so it's tome, like a rishain l'toma. So that would mean that if it touches something else, it becomes a sheni l'toma. Chalkan, if you went ahead and you divided them from each other, So zeh sheni v'zeh sheni. Now I say that each one of them is going to be only a sheni l'tumah, and that is because we don't have the full amount of erishan in each part. We don't know. So you could have a half a part of erishan here and a half a part of erishan here. So therefore it's not enough, and therefore it's going to be a sheni l'tumah.
And then what happens?
So, well, if it's a sheni l'tumah, if it touches something else, it will become a shlishi. That's by the case of truma. By truma, there's the tumah goes to shlishi l'tumah. Okay, so whenever you have a rishon and sheni together, and it's not the full amount of a rishon l'tumah, so it's mitzvah to the sheni, and it'll just be a sheni l'tumah. That's the lashon that it says there in the Mishnah. Says Rava now, but now if after it was separated, and now you have the Rishon and Sheni in each half that combines together just to be a Sheni. So even though there's a Rishon inside of it there's a half a kazayas of a Rishon in this piece as well. But now it got mixed after it was separated. So it got mixed to be on the level of only a Sheni. But if Chazav Irvan, if you mix it back together, Rishon Ave, then it becomes a Rishon again. That's what it would seem here. Because it's saying only when it's separated, then each part is a Sheni, but not after it's mixed back together again. Okay, the Gemara is going to go on and prove this now from the Sefer of that Mishnah, but the point that we see here is, Rava is proving that even though once it was separated, so now what happened to the Rishon L'tumah that's inside this? The Rishon L'tumah, because it got separated and there's only half a kezayis of the Rishon L'tumah, it gets connected to the Sheni L'tumah, and it goes down to the level of Sheni L'tumah. It only combined to the level of Sheni, not more than that. But nevertheless, after when you combine it back together again, that Rishon L'tumah that's there, the two halves of the Rishon L'tumah that's in the two pieces, when they join together again, vayiketz kiyashan, it wakes up again, and that becomes again a Rishon L'tumah. So just like you say that there, we could say the same thing over here regarding the machshavas, the two machshavas of chutz l'zmanai, even though it combined and it went down a level, chutz l'mekaymai, but once it joins together to another chutz l'zmanai, to a full kazayis, it's vayikatz kiyashan apigel. It comes back together to be pigel. So now here it goes on to say that I see this clearly from the Sefer. Mimai, how do I know that once you mix it back together, the Rishon L'tumah comes back to its level of a Rishon? Because Mediktani Sefer. And the Sefer then says, Nafal zeh ba'atzmai v'zeh ba'atzmai al kikar shel trumah. If you have this piece and another piece, in other words, each piece separately, that we just said is only a sheni l'tumah, and it falls onto a bread of trumah, so then what happens? Paslua. It becomes pasul. The term pasul means that it'll make that other thing that it touches tameh, but not that it could then be metame yet something else. That's the term pasul. Because by trumah, it becomes tameh to the level of shlishi l'tumah. So if you have each piece separately, as we just saw, is a sheni l'tumah, so it touches another piece, it becomes a shlishi l'tumah, and that's it, not further. However, noflu shneihem ka'achas, if they both fell together onto a piece of a bread of terumah, so whether together, these two pieces now join together, or one after the other, and now you have the first and the second together that is touching this bread of terumah, then asua shniya. Now, after it joins back together, it becomes again a rishon l'tumah, and therefore the bread of the trumah that it touches, it will become a sheni l'tumah. So you see clearly in the sefer of this Mishnah that after it was separated, but then it went down a level to be a sheni l'tumah because the rishon was divided into half. But now it joined together again, it becomes again a rishon l'tumah, and therefore makes the trumah a sheni.
When it said nafal zeh b'atzmo v'nafal b'atzmo, there are two different. There are two halves.
Yes, when it was divided into two halves.
Two halves. It just could be.
Yeah, well, that's what it means when it's two separate pieces,
it means half,
right? And well, after one piece went off from the bread of the trumah, only then did the other piece fall onto it, not together. Okay. But if it falls together, it joins together to become a rishon l'tumah again. Okay. This is the source of Rava. Rav Amnone will answer you. There's no raya from that Mishnah to our case. Why? Because Hasam ikishiyura. Over there, in that case, from the beginning, there was a full kazayis, or kebeya in that case actually. There was a full kebeya, the full amount that you need for it to be a rishon l'tumah. So therefore, even though it was split later on, but then afterwards when it combines together, there's that full shear that was there from the beginning. Therefore I say that will combine again to be a rishon l'tumah. But hacha, however, in our case, from the beginning, what was it? He was only thinking chutz lizmani for a half a kazayas. So there's only a half a kazayas for the pigel. And another half a kazayas that's not pigel, that's puzzle. So once it combines to that, it loses the name pigel, because it never in the chatchila had the full name of pigel. So it loses the name of pigel, it just becomes puzzle, and then therefore even when it combines back together again, it cannot be pigel. So there's no raya, there's no comparison from that case to our case here. Now, Amar Rav Amnuna says, Minullah, it's a source from my halacha that I say that it will not combine together again to be pigol. The Tanan, because the Mishnah says, Ha'oichol, you have food, shenitma ba'avatoma. The food became tome from avatoma. Vishenitma bevladatoma. And then other food that became tome with rishon latoma, which is a vlad from the avatoma, the next level down. Okay, so what are we talking about over here? One piece of food that became tome from the avatoma was only a half a kazayas. Then there's another piece that became tome, also a half a kazayas from a rishon latoma. So now mitztarfe and zemze, if these two pieces, these two half a kazayisim that are tome now, they will combine together. L'tame bekal shebishneim. They will now be metame with the lower level of tumah that there is when you combine them together. So you go by the vlad atumah that was, let's say, a rishon latumah, and therefore it touched this half a kazayis, which became a sheni latumah, one level down. So it becomes tameh when you combine them together in the lower level. Okay, so now the Gemara says, what's the raya that Rav Amnuna is bringing from this Mishnah? My love, don't you think when it says over here that they're mitztarefim zemzeh, that this is afagav the hadamalye, even in a case when he then filled it in together, which means even if from the oichel rishon that one second, even if he filled it back together, that it should be from that oichel rishon, that it should be a full kebeya of a oichel rishon, still it will always remain in that lower level bekal b'shneim, right? So the point that he's saying is, if you take the words of the Mishnah is saying that once you have this half a kazayis that combined with a lower level, because it was combined to a lower level of tumah, it goes down to that lower level, regardless. Once it got that status of the lower level, it remains with that, even if afterwards you would then go and fill in, you would add to the rishon l'tumah that it should be a full kazayis of a rishon l'tumah, or a full kebeya rather, a full kebeya of the rishon l'tumah. It's not going to help. It's not going to change anything. Why? Because once it went down to combine to another half the kazayis to a lower level of tumah, it remains on that lower level. Even if you fill it in, it won't wake up again to bring it back to the rishon l'tumah. So therefore, Rav Amnuna says, just like there I say that once it combines to a lower level, it remains on that lower level. The same thing over here by pigel. Once it went down to the level of a psul and not pigel anymore, because the chutz lizmanai combined to the half a kazayis of chutz l'mekaymai, even if you again later think another half a kazayis chutz lizmanai, it won't go back up to that level. No. That's how Rav Amnuna understood the lashon of that Mishnah. But the Gemara says, not necessarily is it a proof. Dilme delei adamalye. Over there when it says that it's only metame bekal shebishneim, so Rav Amnuna's diak was that it just says that plain and simple, doesn't make any distinctions. But the Gemara says, even though it doesn't make any distinctions, we could say that it means only in a case where it remains that half a kazayis that combined to the other lower level of tumah with the half a kazayis. But if you would add another half a kazayis to the higher level of tumah that's here, maybe it would combine. Maybe it would combine then to become on the higher level of tumah again. It would wake up to go back to the higher level. So therefore, there's no raya from here. Okay, now the Gemara brings a similar discussion where there was different versions about what was said about this. Ki asar Avdimi, when Avdimi came, Omar, he said, if the Kayan was thinking as follows, Chatzi Zayis, he's going to eat, that what's going to be eaten is a half a kazayis, chutz l'mekaymai, out of its place. And then so that's only a half a kazayis, so it has to combine to something else. And then he's thinking v'chatzi zayis chutz l'zmanoi, another half a kazayis out of its time. V'chatzi zayis chutz l'zmanoi, another half a kazayis also out of its time. So what happens in such a case? Tani bar kapare, so bar kapare says pigol, and in such a case it's going to be pigol.
Because you have two half the time.
Oh, because ein chatzi zayis moyel b'mokim kazayis. The half a kazayis of the chutz l'mekaymai is not going to mix in to now what you have here, a full kazayis of chutz l'zmanoi that he actually thought together. They go together. So even though he first thought about this half a kazayis of chutz l'mekayim, but that's only a half a kazayis. But now afterwards he has the two thoughts of chatzi zayis chutz l'zmanoi and other chatzi zayis chutz l'zmanoi. They combine together to make it a full pigul. That's the version the way Rav Dimi said, what Bakapara taught. Gasser Rav Dimi Yama, when Rav Dimi came, he said it as follows. Chatzi zayis chutz l'zmanoi. First, the thought was a half a kazayis to eat out of its time. Then again, v'chatzi zayis chutz l'zmanoi, another half a kazayis out of its time. V'chatzi zayis chutz l'mekaymoi, and only in the end did he think a half a kazayis that he would eat out of its place. So it's in this case that Tani Bakapara said pigul, that it will be pigul because of the thoughts of chutz l'zmanoi that now combine together to a full kazayis that he thought in the beginning. And ein chatzi zayis moyol b'mokim kazayis. A half a kazayis is that does not help, does not change anything in the place of a kazayis. Meaning the half a kazayis of chutz l'mekaymai that he thought of in the end, after he already has the full kazayis of chutz l'zmanoi, that's not going to change anything. What's the reason? So over here, according to this version, that who's it over here? This is Ravin. The version that Ravin says we only are not going to count the chatzi zayis chutz l'mekaymai to mix in, to take it out of its pigul if it comes at the end. But if it was in the beginning, even though it's only half a kazayis, but because that's a thought that he had in the beginning, it would actually mix in and take it out from its status of pigul. Ravashi Masni Hachi. Ravashi had a third version of what Bar Kapara said regarding this kind of halacha, and this is similar to the halacha that Rava said before, Vayikatz kiyoshan a pigul, but actually with even more of a chiddush, as we'll see here. So he taught it as follows. If the thought was first, chatzi zayis chutz l'zmanoi, that a half a kazayis is going to be eaten out of its time. And then, kazayis. And then he thinks together regarding one kazayis, that chetzeh will be chutz l'mekaymai, half of it out of its place, and the chetzeh chutz l'zmanoi, and half of it out of its time. So Tani Bar Kapara, even in this case, Bar Kapara said, pigul, that we will combine the two halves of the kazayis that he thought chutz l'zmanoi to make it pigul, and therefore ein chatzi zayis moyel b'mokum kazayis. The half of kazayis that he thought to eat out of its place will not mix in to the full kazayis that you have now regarding the machshava of chutz l'zmanoi. So over here, this is more than what Rav said before, because over here the machshava of chutz l'mekaymai is mamish joined together with the machshava of chutz l'zmanoi, because he's thinking about one kazayis. Right. This one kazayis, I'm going to eat chutz l'zmanoi and chutz l'mekaymai. But nevertheless, because in the beginning he already had a machshava for another half a kazayis to eat chutz l'zmanoi, it combines with the half a kazayis first to the half a kazayis in the end to be a full kazayis of chutz l'zmanoi to make it a full pigul. This is similar to what Rav says, vayikatz kiyoshan, that now the pigul here wakes up, but even in a case where he joined together the chutz l'mekaymai there, still the original pigul wakes up. Dr. Gemara, Omer Rav Yanai said, Chishev sheyechlu klovim. If the person is thinking that who's going to eat it out of its time, a dog is going to eat it, this carbon out of its time, tomorrow. Pigul, that's going to be pigul. Which means that even the dog, to eat it, is a machshava for an achila. That it's called achila when the dog eats it, and therefore it's a machshava to eat it out of its place, out of its time rather. Where do we see that when a dog eats it's achila? Because the pasuk uses this term, the chsiv, it says v'sizevel yoichlu haklavim chelik Yisrael, and Izevel, the dogs will eat in chelik Yisrael. So we see it uses the term eating regarding a dog. Maskeflo Ravami asks, if that's the case, that eating doesn't have to be just by a human being to eat, but we're relying on the lashon of the pasuk to say that even a dog's eating is eating. Elamayata, if so, chishiv sheteichlu eish l'machar. What's if a person thinks that fire will consume this carbon out of its time tomorrow? Would that also be a dachila in the lashon of the pasuk? Because the chsiv it says teichlu eish, that the fire consumes it. Loi nupach, it was not fanned, it wasn't blown. So you see here that it says the term of achila regarding fire. So chanami the pigul, are you going to say that with this kind of thought the term achila applies and therefore it's going to be pigul? Now, if you'll argue and say, yes, hachanami, in fact, this is the halacha, it would be pigul. But on this, there's a question from what it said in the Mishnah before. But what not, the Mishnah before said, what if the person is thinking, lechol kechatzi zayis, olahakti kechatzi kezayis, that a half a kezayis is going to be eaten out of its time, and another half is going to be burnt on the mizbeach out of its time. So we don't combine these two. So the Mishnah before said kosher, that it's going to be kosher, and we can't combine. Why she'ein achila v'aktara mitzdarfen? Because you can't combine a half a kezayis for achila and a half a kezayis for aktara. It's two different kinds of consumptions, by a human being or by the mizbeach, and these two things do not combine. So the Gemara's question is, if the achila of the mizbeach with a fire, which is the way it's supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach properly, still that does not combine. Definitely over here, if a person is thinking that stam, a fire, would burn this carbon out of its time, that we shouldn't consider that to be an achila to combine to the, or shouldn't be any achila b'chlal to be considered pigel. So the Gemara says, well, actually it depends what the person was thinking. If the person was thinking about the fire consuming, and he was thinking with in the lashon of achila that a fire will eat it, so then yes, it will become pigel. Over here in the Mishnah where it says that you can't combine the chatzi kezayis of haktara to achila, it's two different things. Achila and haktara don't combine together. Why is that? Because the afke beloshen haktara, because the machshava he had was that this is going to be eaten by a human being, and this is going to be burnt on the mizbeach with the language of haktara. The lashon achila lachod, the lashon haktara lachod. These two expressions of achila and haktara are separate, and therefore that will not combine. But if it's taken the lashon of achila, of a fire, eating in the fire, so then it will become pigel. Another shayla Gemara says the Bayer Ravashi. Ravashi asked Chishiv lechol. The machshava was that it's going to be eaten kezayis of the full kezayis, but how? B'shnei b'nei adam. Two people are going to eat this out of its time. Mahu. What's the halacha here? Basa machshava as linon. The ikish yura. Do I follow the machshava and you have a full kezayis in his machshava to combine to say that it will become pigel, even though it's two people, but it's a psul in the carbon, so you have the total amount of the kezayis in that amount that he's thinking. Or the shear of kezayis is based on the person that's eating. So since each person is only eating a half a kezayis, so you don't have a shear there, so it's not going to become pigel. V'leke shiyura. Amar Abaye says Abaye Toshama. We can bring a raya from this Mishnah that we just quoted. Lechol kechatzi zayis, or lahakti kechatzi zayis. If the thought is that a half a kezayis you'll eat out of its time, and another half is going to be burnt out of its time, so then kosher. Why? As we said, these two things, eating, a human being eating, and the burning on the mizbeach do not combine together as one. So now the Gemara is medayek. What do I understand from this? Oh, lechol v'lechol. However, if it's a case where the person is thinking that two people are going to eat each a half a kezayis, domye de lechol v'lahakter, similar to the case of the Mishnah where it's two half kezayisim with two different things, one a human being eating and one the mizbeach burning. So here also, in a case which is similar, that it's two human beings separate that are eating each a half a kezayis. So, but it's not the lahakte though. It's two half a kezayis for achila, and in such a case, heichidami, what is this? The case that we're talking about, b'shnei b'nei adam, when it's two people mitztarev, this would combine. The only reason it doesn't combine is because this is achila, and this is a different lashon, as the Gemara said before. This is haktara. But if it's two people, it would combine. Shma mina. So from here I see that it will combine in such a case. Another shayla Rava asked, Chishiv lechol kezayis b'yosem b'chdei achilas pras. If the machshava was that a kezayis will be eaten out of its time, but longer than the time it takes to eat a half a loaf of bread, which is the shear that we learn out. The Gemara in a few places learns out that the shear of a kezayis by a human being in achila has to be within that amount of time that it takes to eat a half a loaf of bread. But over here, though, he thought to eat it in more than that period of time. Mahu, what's the halacha here? Does it combine to be a shear to make the carbon pigel? What's the shayla? Do I say la'achilas gevayim edaminan le? Do I compare to the achila of the mizbeach itself? Because where do I learn out in the pasuk that pigel applies to the two achilas? Whether the achila of the mizbeach or the achila of the person. It's learned from the lashon of the pasuk he'achal yachal. It says both together, the achila of the mizbeach and the achila of the person. So therefore I could say that over here, we don't go by the regular shear of a human being that the kezayis has to be within that period of achilas pras. We go by the mizbeach, where there could be even a longer period of time. And therefore, it will be pigel. Or in this case, we do compare it to the regular achila of a person, and therefore it has to be within kedei achilas pras. Amar Abaye says, Abaye, we can prove it from the same Mishnah before. Toshama, the Mishnah said, Lechol kechatzi zayis alahakti kechatzi zayis. If the thought was to eat a half a zayis and that the mizbech will burn a half a zayis out of its time, kosher, that's kosher, it doesn't combine. She'ein achila v'aktora mitzdarfen. It's two different things, eating and burning on the mizbech, they will not combine. What do I see from the Mishnah though? The reason why it doesn't combine, because it's two different things, eating and burning. But if it would be two eatings, and here some gerses add dumya de lahakter, similar to the way it's burnt on the mizbeach, which means even if it's a longer period of time of kedei achilas pras, like it is by the mizbeach, it doesn't have to be within that period of time. Mitzdareh, if it would combine. The Gemara spells it out here. No, this is two achilas. The Gemara is saying, what's if it's two achilas, but it's longer than kedei achilas pras, similar to the way it is by aktara. Because when you burn the mizbeach, it could burn slow, it could burn quick, it depends what kind of fire it is. So since over there it's longer than achilas pras, it's mashma, that as long as it's two achilas, even if it's longer than achilas pras, it would combine. Says the Gemara, not necessarily is it a diak because dilme behesegadol. Maybe the lahakter that the Mishnah says it's talking about lahakter with a very big fire that it burns very quickly within the achilas pras, and therefore the diak when it's two achilas of two half kezesim, it would only combine in such a kind of case where it's going to be within kedei achilas pras. So there's no raya to this iboya. Okay, now the Gemara explains. This point of the Mishnah that we just quoted a few times, it said in the Mishnah, Lechol kechatzi zayis lahakte chatzi zayis. So this machshava of these two half kezeisim will not combine, and therefore it's kosher. Says the Gemara, Taime, the reason it doesn't combine is because the lechol lahakte, because one half is achile and another half is aktaret to burn on the mizbeach. However, if he's thinking that he's going to eat, and he's going to eat something that it's not the derech to eat, then mitzdarev, then it would combine, because it says here only if you're thinking the machshava of lahakter, that's something that doesn't combine. But if it's to eat this that you would be makter,
even if it's not something
that's not something that you would eat, because that's the sacrificial parts to be burnt in the mizbeach, but then it would combine. That's what it's mashma from this part of the Mishnah. This is the last point in the Mishnah. The question is, Hokatani Reisha, but it clearly says in the Reisha of the Mishnah are different. Over there it says, Lechol, Eshadarke, Lechoil, if the thought is to eat something which is intended for eating, or Eshadarke, so then the Mishnah says it will become pigul. The Mishnah goes on to say also, Lahakter, Dov, Eshadarke, Lahakter, then it will become pigul. But you see from the Mishnah, Eshadarke, Lechol in. If he's thinking to eat something that is intended for eating, then it becomes pigul. But she'ein darkai loy. But if you're going to eat, if you're thinking to eat something which is not the derech to eat, it will not become pigul. So we have a contradiction from the Reisha of the Mishnah to the Sefer, where there it's mashma that only because he thought lahakter, therefore it won't be pigul to combine to achila. But if he's thinking to eat, even if it's something that is not usually eaten, you usually burn it on the mizbeach, it would combine. Rabbi Yirmiyah answers, Hamani, the Sefer of the Mishnah that says that even if it's something that you usually burn, it will combine to become pigul when you think that you want to eat it. This is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Rabbi Eliezer holds this, the Amar, Rabbi Eliezer said, we had it quoted before here in the Perek, that Machashvin, Ma'achilis Adam, Ma'achilis Mizbeach, that the thought to eat, that's something that a human being eats, and the person is thinking, the kain is thinking that the mizbeach will burn it out of its time, or the opposite, achilas mizbeach, achilas adam, something that's achilas mizbeach, and he thinks that a person is going to eat it, even though it's not the derech, that kind of machshava will passel. Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah later, it says, his thought is to eat out of its place, or to burn out of its place, even a part of the carbon that's not usually eaten, or not usually burnt on the mizbeach, kosher. So the Tanakama says that it's kosher, but for Rabbi Eliezer, paisol, Rabbi Eliezer pasels. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, the Sefer of the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer, even though the Reisha of the Mishnah is the Chachamim. Abaye says, no, I could say the entire Mishnah follows the Rabbanan's opinion that if it's not the derech, then that machshava will not make it pigul. V'loi teimed, don't be medayik as you were medayik before in the seif of the Mishnah. Don't be medayik halechol v'lechol dover she'ein darkei lechol. That if he has a thought to eat something which is not the derech, that then it'll still be pigel. Ela eime. All you have to learn from the Mishnah is, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that if you thought a half a kazayis lechol to eat and a half a kazayis to burn in the mizbeach, that doesn't combine. So be medayik as follows. But hal lechol v'lechol dover she'darkei lechol. That if he thinks that he's going to eat and eat another half a kazayis and only something which is the derech to eat, so then it's going to be pigel. So you can't make a dikaveh for this chiddush that even if he thinks a thought to eat something which you usually burn on the mizbeach will also be pigel. So what the Gemara says on this, but if that's the case, if that's the only dik you're making from the Mishnah, so then my kamash balon. What is the chiddush in the halacha of this sefer that the Mishnah is saying here? If the chiddush of the seif over here of the Mishnah is coming to say that it has to be something that's darkei lechol, that's the derech to eat it, and then it's going to become pigel. Right? So in other words, if we're not being medayik from it anything, right? So it's only coming to say that it has to be something which is the derech to eat, and then it's going to be pigel. But mireisha shmamino, we already see this from what it says in the reisha of the Mishnah, because the reisha of the Mishnah said kechatzi zayis b'chutz. Possible that if he has a machshava, he's going to eat half of it outside and not in its place, half of it not in its time. So then it's going to become puzzle, right? So that's telling you that as long as you have a machshava to eat something that you usually eat, so you could combine one half a kazayis together with another half a kazayis, and it'll become pigel. So if the halach over here is just simply coming to say that as long as you have a machshava to eat something that's the derech to eat, so then it becomes pigel, so that we see already from the point of the reisha of the Mishnah. What's the chiddush over here in this case? Now, if you're going to say, if it's coming to tell me this very halach itself, there's no diak here. Just look at the words of the Mishnah itself. It's coming to say that you cannot combine a half a kazayis of achila to a half a kazayis of aktara. That's all it's coming to say. But that midukyu the reisha shmamino, that I already know from the diak of the reisha of the Mishnah. Why? Because in the reisha of the Mishnah it said lechol davish darke lechoil, that if you're going to eat something that it's a derech to eat it, so then it's going to become pigel. That's what it says in the Mishnah and the reisha. So what do I see from that? Only if it's a derech to eat it in, then it becomes pigel. She'ein darke lechol. But if you're thinking to eat something out of its time and it's not the derech to eat it, loy, then it's not going to be pigel. That's the diak that we see from the reishas and Mishnah as the Gemara was medayik before. So now the Gemara says, if so, hashter. Once I see this point in the reisha of the Mishnah, I have a kabel chaymer. If he's thinking two thoughts of achila, they're both achila. But the problem is, one half of the achila is on something that you don't usually eat. It's made to burn in the mizbeach. It still does not combine, even though it's two thoughts of achila. So do I need to say that if one half a kazayis was to eat, another half a kazayis was to burn, do I have to say that it won't combine together? Obviously it doesn't combine together. Here it's two completely different things. So therefore, what would be the chiddush in the seif of the Mishnah? But the Gemara says, no, actually, this is more of a chiddush here. This itself is a chiddush without any diak. Why? Because lechol v'alahakter, it's tericha. There is a chiddush to say that I don't combine these two halves of achila and aktara together. Why? From the diak of the reisha of the Mishnah, I would say, hasamu dulav ki orche kamachashev. In the reisha of the Mishnah, when there's two thoughts of achila, true, it's two thoughts of achila, but one half is to eat something which is not the derech. So if it's not the derech, that's the reason why it doesn't combine. But over here, when he's thinking two thoughts, one for achila and one half for aktara, maybe here, since each half is in its ordinary way, what is supposed to be done with it, even though it's two different names, two different things, but maybe it would combine. Therefore, the Mishnah here says, in this case as well, that since it's two different things, achila and aktara, it will not combine. We shall return to you the second perek of Masechta Zevochim, perek kol hazachim shekiblu daman.